Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, Dustin May dominated in a Dodgers win over the D-backs. We're going to talk about May's awesome game, his curveball usage recently, and we're going to talk about Dave Roberts' decision to bring in Phil Bickford in a close-ish game in the eighth inning over Evan Phillips. And we'll talk a little bit about Freddie Freeman, too. That's what's on tap. So let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Dodger fans, this is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now, and then you will never miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time with us, I am Jeff Snyder. My co-host is Vince Samperio. Vince and I are doing a split episode today, so I will be with you for the first half. Vince will be with you for the second half of this show. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans, just like you are. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we're not quite insiders, but we bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. And with that said, let's jump right in. Dodgers beat the Diamondbacks 5-2. Dustin May was outstanding. 1 run allowed in 5 innings. And Vince is going to talk a little bit in his half about that 1 run. It came in really the only inning that May didn't look invincible. He just 5 of his 6 innings, he just looked unhittable. And that one inning, he allowed 1 run. And, there's some reasons for it, but, you can't quibble too much with the results. But one of the interesting things, a listener who I actually don't know his name. I feel kind of bad. I only know his Twitter handle and his Twitter name. And I asked him for his name before I started recording, but he didn't immediately get back to me. So if he tells me, I'll tell you another time. But he's at 100_KEKS. His Twitter name is Patron Saint of the Unemployed. I could use it. I could use a job right now. If you got a good job for me, let me know. Anyway, he sent me a message asking about Dustin May and his curveball usage so far this season. He said, I'm looking in Dustin May here after your tweet about his swinging strikes total. Dustin May had 4 swings and misses in the first inning. His pace slowed down after that, but really dominant way to start the game. Anyway, he says, I was looking in Dustin May here. I'm a little concerned about his curveball usage. It's got a career whiff rate in the 40s, but he's been using it less since getting Tommy John. The deficit has been made up in 4-seam usage, which is historically his second best ex-Woba pitch. First is his sinker, but he's been throwing that at 99 plus this season. So not worried about the higher usage there. I guess my question is, if you think the lower curveball usage is the front office being careful after his Tommy John, or a distinct difference in how his mechanics work. I feel like the curveball had the potential to be his high leverage pitch, but if his elbow doesn't work anymore, he might have to adjust to being a high velo 4-seam sinker type of guy. And he did mention that Dustin May was shoving, so it's not like he's kind of nitpicking there. But it's something I hadn't really thought about. I don't. Sometimes I notice things like that, and sometimes I don't. And so I told him, I said, I don't know, but I'll give it some thought. And as I thought about it, something I realized was both of May's starts this season have come against the Diamondbacks. And one thing we've seen about the Diamondbacks lineup is they love to stack them some lefties. They got a couple switch hitters, and they've got a lot of lefties. And so against the Dodgers right-handed pitchers, I'm trying to think. Like, I know Gabriel Moreno and Christian Walker were in the lineup tonight, Thursday night. Those are the only 2 righties I can think of. There may have been one more, but I mean, they have a ton of lefties. And pitchers have different repertoires against righties than lefties. Most changeup pitchers will use it more against opposite-handed hitters. Just the way a changeup moves, it moves away. It moves arm side, so it's away from a right-hander throwing a changeup. It will move away from a left-handed hitter, which is what you're looking for. And I think there's kind of a subliminal concern, subconscious concern on the pitcher's part about a right-handed pitcher throwing his changeup to a righty. You don't want it to tail in and hit the batter in the knee. And so you're worried about overcompensating and end up hanging it over the middle of the plate. I think there's some of that. We've seen, Tommy Kahnle last year had a lot of success throwing his changeup to right-handed hitters. When you can do it, Ross Stripling does it too. But not all pitchers feel comfortable doing that, and Clayton Kershaw, he throws his slider more to righties and his curveball more to lefties. It's just every pitcher has their pitch mix is going to look different against different handed batters. And so I wondered out loud to this friend of the show, and by out loud, I mean in a Twitter direct message, if it could have to do with the fact that he's faced mostly left-handed hitters this year. And so I wasn't really in a position I was streaming the game, airplaying the game on my computer, from my computer to my TV. And so I couldn't use my computer for looking up stats, looking up Twitter stuff. So I was just using my phone, and with these big fat thumbs, look at these things, not very good at searching stats on my phone. And so, but this friend of the show was in a position, and he looked it up. He mentioned that he hadn't really thought about that point. He looked up, and turns out, yeah, he's actually throwing his curveball more this year, or last year and this year, against righties than he has before. His usage has actually gone up. It's against lefties that he's throwing it less. And so it seems, and we're still talking about small sample, he's thrown 12 innings this year. So we'll see how that evolves over the season. But it seems like right now, he said curveball against righties was 25% in 2021 before he got hurt, and 34% last year and this year. And in 2021 against lefties, it was 20% of the time. Last year, it was down to 13% of the time. And this year, obviously, it's low enough that he noticed it. And he has a much higher whiff rate on the curveball against righties. It's 41% against lefties, 52% against righties. So the fact is, as far as swing and miss anyway, it's a more effective pitch against righties. So it makes sense that he would use it more against righties. This was a really interesting conversation for me. Because like I said, like I told him, it was something I hadn't thought about. It hadn't crossed my mind, Dustin May's curveball usage. If anything, I've been wondering about the changeup, because, last year when he was coming back from Tommy John, one of the big stories was he's added a changeup, and he did use it a little bit, and we haven't seen the changeup much at all this year. I don't know if he's thrown any. I haven't charted every pitch, but he definitely hasn't been using it a lot. And like I was talking about earlier, right-handed pitchers often like the changeup against left-handed hitters, and so team like the D-backs, it seems like if it was a pitch he's confident in, he would be using it. That's what I've been thinking about more. I hadn't even thought about the curveball really much. And so I want to tell this guy whose name I don't know, I really appreciate him reaching out to me, because this kind of stuff fascinates me. And I think it's interesting. I'd love to hear from you guys if you think it's interesting. It was to me, and it was to this friend of the show that I was talking to about it. Love to know if it is to you. But yeah, I'm also interested to see, as Dustin May goes forward and faces, I think his next start will probably be against the Giants, who have some lefties too, but I don't think they'll stack the lefties quite as much as the D-backs have. I'm actually not totally familiar. I can think of, Lamont Wade and Jock Peterson and Mike Yastrzemski, Michael Conforto. Those are all the Giants I can think of right now. I assume they have guys who play other positions too, and they probably bat either left-handed or right-handed. I'll find out on Monday. But I think May's next start will come against the Giants, and so we'll see what his pitch usage is like then. It's something that's interesting to me to keep an eye on going forward as he faces other teams and other makeup of lineups, and see how that pitch mix evolves. But the takeaway from this game was that Dustin May was awesome, and Vince is going to talk more about that during his half of the show. I'm going to come back in a minute. I'm going to talk about Dave Roberts' decision to bring in Phil Bickford in the 8th inning of a 5-2 game over Evan Phillips. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. This episode is brought to you by So Rare. Our new sponsor, So Rare, is a revolutionary fantasy baseball game and marketplace transforming fans into owners with officially licensed digital cards featuring players from across all 30 MLB teams. Unlike other fantasy baseball platforms, So Rare managers truly own their fantasy experience. collecting, buying, selling, competing with player cards against global opponents to win epic rewards. What kind of epic rewards, you ask? Well, So Rare MLB games game weeks happen twice weekly and span a 3 or 4 day cycle. At the end of game weeks, So Rare MLB managers who rank at or near the top of their leaderboards win a variety of rewards, which can include So Rare scarcity cards, game tickets, merchandise, signed jerseys, and VIP experiences like meeting actual MLB stars. Prizes may vary depending on the competition, but that's some pretty cool potential prizes here. And win or lose, you still own your cards and there's no cost to play. Plus, the more you win, the more you advance, collecting increasingly powerful cards and accessing next level competitions and rewards. So head to sorare.com/lockedon. That's SORARE.com/lockedon to draft your team of free player cards, set your lineup, and start competing today to win epic rewards. Again, that's sorare.com/lockedon to start playing today. All right, I am back. I want to thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. If you're watching on YouTube, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the YouTube comment section. Especially, I'd love to hear if you found that Dustin May curveball stuff interesting like I did, or if you were bored that first segment. If you were bored, I'm glad you're still here. Maybe this one will be more exciting for you. Hopefully you weren't bored, though. I thought it was interesting, and I think most of our listeners are kind of into that kind of stuff. But if you weren't, I'd love to hear that too. If you were, I'd love to hear that. Whatever your comments are, shoot them in the YouTube comment section. Or if you're listening on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you through social media or email or whatever. Vince will give you all that contact info at the end, like he always does. My other topic I want to talk about, we got a message on Twitter during the game from Dr. Sam, PhD, MD, JK at Johnny Bohr on Twitter. He tweeted at us as the Dodgers were bringing in Phil Bickford to start the bottom of the 8th inning. He said, "What are your first thoughts seeing Bickford in the 8th? He hasn't thrown a single pitch, and I'm going to be on record saying this is a bad idea." And I replied to him, but I thought it was worth talking about here on the podcast too. I didn't see his tweet until after the game, so you have to take my word for it that this was my actual thought. But those of you who know me probably won't be surprised. I said, my first thought was that it's a great spot to see if Bickford has anything to contribute to this team. If you never give him biggest chances, you never know what he has. And the part I didn't say there, but I did mention to Vince in a text message, I would have hated the move if this was October. April 6th, I loved it. Loved is maybe too strong. I was fine with it because Phil Bickford is on the roster. And Phil Bickford has been good at times in the past. And Phil Bickford still has good stuff. And so the only way the Dodgers are going to find out if Phil Bickford has anything to contribute to this team is to give him opportunities to contribute to the team. And a 5-2 lead in the 8th inning, it's a pretty good chance. We know he has to face at least 3 hitters. That means the worst he can do is allow the other team to tie it up. It's a high leverage-ish situation with much less of the risk. And now I thought it was a really good situation to bring him in. And yeah, it looked bad when he hung that slider to Ketel Marte to give up a leadoff double, throws a wild pitch to move him over to third. But then we saw, we saw Phil Bickford we've never seen before. He was throwing harder than he's ever thrown before as a Dodger. And he struck out the next 2 guys and then got a lazy fly out to end the inning. It was the good hitters. It was Lourdes Gurriel and Christian Walker who he struck out. It was a tough part of the lineup, and Phil Bickford came through. And I know a lot of people feel like they need to play to win every single game. And especially when Evan Phillips ended up pitching the 9th inning, it's like, well, why didn't you use him against the heart of the order in the 8th inning instead? My guess is that, and I haven't seen, I don't know if they talked with Dave Roberts about this after the game. I saw some of the media interviews, but I didn't see the conversation with Dave Roberts yet as I'm recording this. So I don't know if they asked him, but my guess would be that the hope was to not use Evan Phillips at all. But then once the D-backs got a runner on third with nobody out, they kind of had to get Phillips warming up because it looked like they might need him in the 8th inning. And once you've warmed him up, might as well bring him in. There's no point not pitching him once he's warmed up. And so he pitched the 9th inning and did great. But Bickford really came through. And for me, I know every game counts the same amount. And so I'm not saying April games don't matter, but April games are a really good time to find out what Phil Bickford has. And I think a lot of things Dave Roberts does maybe slightly decrease their chances of winning today, but actually increase their chances of winning more games overall. Because we saw it with Kenley Jansen a few years ago. Dave Roberts stuck with Kenley Jansen. It was 2021 when Jansen had, I think, 3 straight blown saves right around the All-Star break. And Dave Roberts stuck with him. And guess what? Jansen was lights out, almost as good as he's ever been the last month, 2 months of the season, because Dave Roberts stuck with him. And so, Phil Bickford, if you imagine Phil Bickford later this year pitching important innings and doing well, a lot of that will be because of things like getting confidence in this April 6th game against the D-backs when Dave Roberts stuck with them, brought him in a higher leverage situation against the meat of the order, and he struck out big, good hitters and got the job done. Confidence is important to a relief pitcher, and knowing your manager has confidence in you is important. And so I think the Dodgers' chances of winning more games later are higher right now than they would have been if Dave Roberts had gone just to Evan Phillips in the 8th inning, because Phil Bickford has a better chance of contributing to the team later this year. That's my thought on it. It would have sucked if he had blown the lead, if they had lost the game, because it would have sucked. Dave Roberts would have had to deal with the second guessers. Luckily they didn't, but either way, not results-based, but process-based, I think it was a great opportunity to get Bickford in with a chance to really impact the team, gain some confidence, and believe more in himself, and let Roberts believe more in him. Those are my thoughts. Love to hear if you agree or disagree. Vince is going to come along now. He's going to talk some more about Dustin May. He's going to talk a little bit about Freddie Freeman. Who knows what else Vince will talk about? The only way to find out is to keep listening.
The NBA playoffs are here, and now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, super easy to use, and secure. Then you can bet on everything from money line to point scores to threes drained. I failed with my assessment last time, so it's up to you guys to build your own NBA bets this time. You can bet on spread, money line, total points scored. You get some player props in there, points scored per player, assists, rebounds, things of that nature. And there's exclusive bets for every game. You can kind of check those out. There's a 2x3 where it's just 2 3-pointers in the first 3 minutes. So go to FanDuel.com, check them all out. And remember, you can combine your bets for an even bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Yo, Dodger fans. Vince here to close out the episode. And as Jeff alluded to, we'll be talking a little bit about Freddie Freeman. First, talk a little bit about Dustin May. And Dustin May is, Jeff talked about his curveball specifically, but regardless of all that, Dustin May, another solid outing. That's back-to-back solid outings to start the season. And this is kind of, he's showing what we expect, or maybe unfairly expected from him to do yesterday. Not yesterday, last season. Coming back from Tommy John, we kind of maybe put some unfair expectations of him to come in and be the guy he was right before surgery. And one, I actually did believe that, but also last year, I think it might have been some sense of we kind of need that to happen, especially with the injuries that were going on. It didn't quite work out, but Mays figured it out this year. He really wanted to be more efficient, throw more strikes. We know that he had conversations with Clayton Kershaw about that kind of stuff, and we know that that's something he's been focusing on this year. So he did mention, after this game, that throwing strikes is, the fun part about pitching so far, is that he's been able to throw strikes. He's been able to go deep into games. He's gone at least 6 innings in both of his starts, and for the way he's throwing, it's not just him being efficient. It's not just him, it's not like he's out here pitching to contact. His stuff is still nasty, and Dave Roberts talked a little bit about that. He said, I think with Dustin, it's the quality of strikes. This is as clean and consistent of a throwing delivery that he's had, which is line for the ball to move late in the hitting zone. So with that, he's going to be efficient because guys are going to want to swing the bat early against him. I think for us, just be able to allow him to go deep in games like he has been, that's a tell for success. And that's exactly what it is. I mean, Dustin May stuff is nasty in itself. The late breaking movement, 100 miles an hour sometimes. There's a lot to love about him and about his stuff. But if the command isn't there, which is what we saw last year, then, he's still able to pitch well in a sense, but he's not able to pitch deep into games. You're not really able to rely on him. It was last year, it was more of a, I don't know what's going to happen. You never know what you're going to get. But this year so far, it's been this is the Dustin May we expected, especially, coming off the year he had the other year and how, how he looked last year compared to this year is almost not night and day, because he was still good last year, but it just wasn't the same effectiveness that he has now. And it's been fun to watch so far. And obviously it's very early in the season and there's still a lot that can happen, but it's been fun to watch. He's looking good. Jeff talked about the curveball part of things, but even without that, he's looking close to how he did pre-surgery. And, I think there's been a lot of people that expected a lot from May, even last year, but now this year even more so. And this is the type of guy in May that, if the Dodgers have him, it softens the loss of Walker Buehler a little bit, which is what we were hoping for last year. Didn't quite work out. But it gives you a legitimate guy in the postseason, or two legitimate guys, or three legitimate guys, depending how you feel on the other people, But Julio is probably still going to be the one going into the postseason. But May pitching like this is your legitimate two, not just to break up the lefties like he was, how Dave Roberts announced it to kind of start the season. He's your legitimate number two, could push his way to number one, but at least your number two. And, that's a big benefit for the Dodgers. So, shout out to Dustin May. Look forward to seeing you continue to pitch very well and get into that. The next guy I'm going to talk about is Freddie Freeman, because Freddie Freeman last night had a couple hits, one of those hits being a homer. And it's one of those where I feel like we haven't talked about Freddie Freeman much so far. And I'll bring up why. But Freddie Freeman so far is hitting 385 with an OPS of 1.077. He has 10 hits in his first 26 at-bats and scored 6 runs. So the guy's on fire. Now, maybe why we haven't talked about him so much is that he does have just the one RBI, which came on the home run last night. So he hasn't been the guy bringing in the runs, but he's been the guy that has, either set the table or just been a consistent threat there in the number 2 hole. And I think it just kind of goes with, Freddie Freeman is known for consistency. Freddie Freeman, maybe not even up until last year, Freddie Freeman wasn't known too much for being overly emotional in the sense of getting hype for moments. Last year, he was known maybe to be overly emotional for a different reason, but we're not going to get into that again. But it's just consistent and quiet, I guess, is the one way. How can a guy be hitting almost 400 a week into the season? Not a lot of time, but still a week into the season. And, we've talked about Mookie. We've talked about Outman. We've talked about Miguel Vargas. We've talked about, Max Muncy in positive and negative light. We've talked about Will Smith, MVP candidate, whatever the case is. All that goes on, and Freddie Freeman is, nearly hitting 400 in the first, 6-7 games. So it's a joy to watch Freddie Freeman hit. It was one of those things where, and this can still play out. Obviously, everything we talk about now is with, a grain of salt in the sense of it's been 7 games, and things can change very quickly and very easily, and it's still very early. But with Freddie, he was one that people weren't sure how the shift, changed, the shift restriction rules were going to affect him, because he did go opposite field a lot. And if teams can't shift the way they wanted to, leaving 2 fielders on the left side of the infield, would they maybe, play to that spot a little bit more, that he does hit that 5-6 hole that he, was pretty good at hitting. And we haven't seen too much of that yet. He's gotten a couple hits off. His home run was opposite field. So he still has that opposite field, but it hasn't necessarily bared out to how it's affecting him because of the shift restrictions. But either way, he's hitting and he's hitting well. And, it's one of those where last year, it was Mookie, Freddie, Trey. But Mookie Betts either led the league or was close to leading the league in runs scored. And part of that was because Freddie was hitting behind him. This year, it's been a little bit interesting where, like, when Mookie gets on base, Freddie doesn't hit. And when Mookie doesn't get on base, Freddie does hit. That'll bear itself and as time goes on. And when the bottom of the order continue, if they continue, Outman, Vargas, Miguel Rojas, whoever, if they continue to get on, Mookie gets on, Freddie will have those RBI opportunities. It was interesting. I didn't even realize that he didn't have any RBI until last night, which is a good thing because, like I said, it's one of those where with Freddie, you didn't notice him because he was fine, but you also did notice him, like I mentioned, because he wasn't part of a lot of those. Not that he wasn't part of the big innings or when they scored. He scored 6 times. Obviously, he's part of it, but it's a little bit less noticeable than before. But that big 2-out rally when they put up all the runs the other day against the Rockies, he led off that, or he started that rally with the 2-out double. And I think that's something that we forget, maybe, and it was a big part of that. Now, obviously, there was a lot more hits after that with 2 outs that contributed to all the runs being scored, but it wouldn't have got started without Freddie avoiding that 3rd out. It's when you're up to plate with nobody on and 2 outs, you're allowed to, maybe be a little bit more selfish at the plate. And not that Freddie's not trying to hit a home run or whatever the case is, but he could take some big rips, some big swings and go after it. But, his approach is never going to change. He's out there to do damage, whether it's a single, whether it's a double in the gap, whether it's a home run. A lot of the times his home runs just are, it's one of those where your good pitches are singles and doubles to Freddie, and then your mistakes are home runs. So it's one of those. Yesterday, he just faced the pitcher last week, so he kind of knew. He talked about this after the game, and talked about he started me off with a bunch of sliders, but when he got to a certain count, he did throw the slider or throw the fastball. Freddie gets fastball, and Freddie got fastball up and away, hit it over the wall. It's just a joy to continue to watch Freddie Freeman, and we're, as Dodger fans, even with the offseason, depending on how you feel about it, we're still blessed, and we're still very lucky to have him. So shout out to Freddie Freeman, shout out to Dustin May, shout out to the Dodgers. That's it for this week. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thank y'all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. They're helping you out with your fantasy season. Matt and Dom are over there doing some good things. So go check them out wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. That's also how you can find us wherever you get podcasts on YouTube if you search Locked On Dodgers, which is how you can find us on social media, Twitter and Instagram. Jeff is on Twitter at Snydog. I'm at Vince Samperio. DMs are open on all those accounts if you need to get a hold of us. You can also get a hold of us via email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com, or via voicemail text at 323-863-5625. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us. When you get in your car, or if you're at home, text My Device Play Podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.